So now, this is just a short video to demonstrate to you that you can indeed use Photo's tone mapping persona, found up here, with non-HDR imagery. So we're talking about regular 8-bit or 16-bit images. So sometimes we assume that tone mapping is an integral part of 32-bit HDR. It's not necessarily. What it does do is use various methods to map out-of-range tones that you would typically find in a 32-bit document or image into a range that can be reproduced by a typical monitor or display. So you'll notice up here that I've got an 8-bit image open. So all I need to do is make sure I've selected the correct pixel layer and then enter the tone map persona. Now, the typical result we're going to get with non-HDR imagery is going to look a bit like this, which is perhaps not what we're really after. So the first step is to reduce the tone compression slider. Then what we can do is start adding local contrast, which is chiefly the main reason we'd want to enter the tone mapping persona for non-HDR imagery, is to achieve that look that adding local contrast gives to an image. So almost similar to developing raw files in the develop persona, we also have access to a number of adjustments down here, and something else we can do if we check detail refinement is to use a very large radius and drag the amount slider up, and this will further increase local detail or local contrast. So from a typical 8-bit or 16-bit image, we can achieve that kind of look that people most associate with HDR imagery because it's had that local contrast tone mapping applied. So then all that remains for us to do is click Apply, and if we just move over to the History panel here, we can step back and here's our result without the tone mapping applied, and here it is with tone mapping applied. So quite a dramatic difference. Okay, so as you may have noticed, that was a pre-processed, tonally adjusted image file. Now, where it might get slightly more interesting is if you're coming straight off the bat from developing a raw image. So here's my typical raw image that has a default tone curve applied. It's very, very contrasty, very punchy, and if I apply a tone map to this, I might not be able to drag out the full range of tones that I really want to be able to. So what we need to do, in effect, is a little bit of pre-processing to the raw file in order to make it more suitable for tone mapping. So what I'm going to do straight away is go up to the assistant here, and I'm going to switch the tone curve option to take no action. So we're no longer applying the tone curve. We end up with a much flatter looking image in terms of contrast. And also I'm going to pull the highlights all the way down. And just to compensate for the compressed tones, I'm going to bring the mids up via the brightness slider. Okay, so this doesn't look particularly punchy or pleasing at the moment, but that's actually okay. So we'll go ahead and click Develop. Then we'll jump straight into the tone mapping persona. Okay, and as we saw with the previous image, the default look is not particularly pleasing. So once again, we'll reduce the amount of tone compression, and then we'll add in some local contrast. So hopefully you can see why I chose to develop the raw file with such a flat, washed out look. It gives us more to work with when we come to actually doing the tone mapping. And if we want to restore some punchiness, we can do so via any number of adjustments. I'm going to use curves. Perhaps not that punchy. There we go. And I'll just bring the tone compression up a little bit. And there we go. So we're tone mapping with a 16-bit developed raw file. So that's that. I hope that's given you some ideas for tone mapping with non-HDR imagery, and also just given you a couple of pointers about how to best develop from a raw file if you're then going to tone map it straight away. Don't forget to check out the other video tutorials, and if you have any questions or queries, please do ask on the Affinity forums. Thank you for watching.